I'm outside of Salem, Oregon at an amusement park called the Enchanted Forest. This is their Old West attraction. When I was here today, I got to looking at Fort Fearless, and of course this is all fake facade, but it made me wonder, could old forts, log cabins, and rough-hewn lumber shacks, and blockhouses, could those have really stopped the bullets of the Old West? With Old West building materials, how much protection would they really give you from Old West type of bullets? Let's find out. Okay, let's shoot some Old West guns. And I hope you all appreciate how much effort I went into getting into character for this. We're at one of our training facilities, and this is our blockhouse. Let me show you what it's made of. These are 4x6 beams, and we just cut them so they fit together like Lincoln logs. Made some trusses, screwed them up there, and it's got a shake roof, actually cedar shingles. Now to shoot through this, you'd have to shoot through a 4x6 beam. Now 4x6s are really only 3.5 inches thick, but against Old West guns, that should do pretty good. Now let me show you what the inside looks like. Now we're in the cabin. You can see we've taken the roof off so we can let some natural light in so you can actually see what's going on in there. We're going to shoot through this wall, and hopefully we won't shoot all the way through it. Let's start small and work our way up. This gun is made by Cimarron Arms and is more or less a copy of a bird's head Colt. It's in caliber .38 Smith and Wesson. Introduced in 1877, the .38 Smith and Wesson is the predecessor of the .38 Special. Let me show you what the cartridge looks like. This is a .38 Smith and Wesson on your right and a .38 Special on your left. Generally speaking, you cannot judge the power of a round by its size. However, in this case, that's a very good way to compare these two. The .38 Smith & Wesson is about that much smaller than the Special, and it's about that much less powerful. .38 Smith & Wesson was a mediocre-sized round and popular in smaller revolvers like this. Let's see how this will do. Those didn't go through. I didn't think they would. Now let's take this high-tech piece of grass and measure how deep they went. Yeah. About 3/4 of an inch. So against that small gun, pretty good. Okay, let's move up the food chain a little bit. This is a Ruger New Vaquero, and it's more or less a copy of a Colt Single Action Army, sometimes called a Colt Peacemaker, and it's in caliber .45 Colt. Let me show you what that cartridge looks like. This is a .45 Colt on your right compared to a .45 Auto on your left. .45 Colt was originally a 250 grain lead bullet backed up by 40 grains of black powder. In terms of power, it's about equivalent to the .45 ACP, but with modern powder it just takes a lot less for the .45 ACP to get the same job done. Introduced in 1872, the .45 Colt was Army issue for many years and one of the most popular cartridges in the Old West. Arguably one of the most powerful handguns you could get at the time. Let's see how this does. Okay, so here's our .45 Colt holes. We'll use our high-tech measuring stick here. Penetrated about an inch. So against the handguns, you're doing pretty good. Let's move up the food chain a little and try a rifle. This rifle is made by Uberti, and it's a replica of a Winchester model 1873 in caliber .44 Winchester centerfire, or 4440. Let me show you what that cartridge looks like. This is the 4440, or 44 Winchester centerfire on your right, compared to the .45 Colt on your left. Both were originally 40 grains of black powder. The difference is, instead of a .45 caliber 250 grain bullet, it's a .42 caliber 200 grain bullet. So when fired out of the rifle with the same powder charge, it gives you a little smaller diameter, a little lighter, a little higher velocity. And yes, even though it's called a .44, it's a .42 caliber bullet. The .44 Winchester centerfire, introduced in 1873 along with the model 1873 rifle, was extremely popular in the Old West. One of the things that made it so popular was its magazine capacity. Full-length rifles would typically hold 15 rounds. They even had an advertisement back then that said something like, "Load on Sunday and shoot all week." Even the carbine versions, the short barrels, would typically hold 10. Let's see how this does. Well, here's our two shots from the 4440. Now, with a smaller diameter bullet, same powder charge, but fired from a rifle, it should have more penetration. And using our high-tech stick, yeah, about 1.5 inches, almost twice as much as the .45 Colt did. And that has to do partly with the smaller diameter bullet, but mainly that it comes out of a rifle. And one thing I want to note in here is that although all the cartridges we're using today are in fact loaded with modern powder, they're all loaded to the same ballistics, the same chamber pressures, the same velocities as original black powder cartridges would have been. So, against a very popular rifle of the time, Blockhouse holding up pretty good. Okay, let's move up the food chain and start getting serious. This rifle is made by Palmetto Arms, and it's more or less a copy of an original Sharps carbine in caliber .45-70. Let me show you what that cartridge looks like. This is a .45-70 on your right compared to a 30-06 in the middle and a .308 Winchester on your left. You can see it's a pretty big round, .45-70 meaning .45 caliber bullet and 70 grains of black powder. The .45-70 was military issue from the 1860s up through the 1890s. It was extremely popular, and among the big cartridges was by far the most popular. If anything has a chance of going through, this does. Let me show you how this rifle works. It's what's called a falling block. You just load that cartridge straight in, and then close your bolt, and then cock the hammer. Okay, let's take a second shot with that. Now the way this rifle works is, you work the lever, cartridge comes out, take another one, put it in, and then you have to cock the hammer again. In the transitional years from muzzle loading to cartridges, this was fairly fast, but as you can see, as Old West years went on, by the 1870s or 80s, this was pretty slow. The camera crew just pointed out to me that sometimes I forget I got to spread these shots out. It doesn't tell us much if they both go through the same hole. So let's take a third shot and move that over a little bit and see if we can get our results something we can work with. Sometimes people ask if I wear earplugs. Yes, I wear earplugs with every shot I take. In fact, I wear earplugs a lot of times when I'm hunting. Okay, let's take a third shot and see how we do. Okay, here's our third shot. Now an interesting thing is, look how far it pushed this block of wood out of alignment. But now let's go in the cabin and see if it really went through. Well, the .45-70 went through. I would have been surprised if it hadn't. But the real story is over here on the other wall. You can see this impact where the bullet just fell out. And here's one where just the jacket is stuck in here. Now bullets in the 1880s wouldn't have had jackets on them, but the point is, that bullet went through the blockhouse, but when it did, it didn't have hardly any power. And if you look down here, here's where another jacket is stuck just on the surface. Now I guarantee you if you got hit with that, that would hurt, but it wouldn't really be a devastating wound. In fact, if you look up here where this bullet fell out, that bullet was laying on the ground right here. So again, that would have hurt, but by the time it came through this wall, it just wouldn't have had much oomph left to it. So did we learn anything? Well, if you have a blockhouse made of 3.5-inch thick lumber, it'll stop most of your Old West type bullets, and you've got to resort to something fairly big before it goes through. But what about if you had a log cabin? Wonder how these guns would do against that. Let's find out. Here's our log cabin. No, I'm not going to build an entire log cabin just to shoot it. These are 6-inch diameter peeler poles. Now on a real log cabin there'd be chinking, there'd be mud here, so there's some inconsistencies, but we're going to try to shoot for the thickest part. Now let me show you the end so you can get a little better feel of what these look like. Okay, here's the end of our log cabin. Now the thing with logs is they're round, so some parts are a lot thicker than others. We're going to try to stay at the thickest part. On a real log cabin, like I said before, there'd be chinking, there'd be mud or wood stuck in here. We're not going to do that here, we're just going to try to stay on the log. A thing with logs is you can see some of these have cracks in them. There's a lot of inconsistencies in these, and a lot of inconsistencies in a log cabin that wouldn't be in something made of lumber like the blockhouse. Last time we started out small and worked up. This time let's start out big and work down. So we'll start with our 45-70 and see if that'll go through. There's a little delay on that second shot because this is a single shot rifle. Let's go see if those bullets went through. Well, here's an interesting point. One bullet went through and one did not. But can you see the copper jacket of the bullet is actually stuck in the log? So the thing is, yeah, the bullet went through, but it wouldn't have had much oomph after it did. Now let's put something up here to see if we can test how much energy that bullet had when it went through. We saw that that bullet went through, but we don't really know how much power it had left when it did. So here's you, and we'll see how badly you get hit when that bullet goes through. Well, here's our bottle, and yes, the bullet did go through. But it did not crack that bottle, it did not expand it, it barely pushed it off that stick it was sitting on. So, yeah, it went through, but it didn't have much energy left when it did. Now, we shot this log at the thickest part. So, the 45-70 definitely will go through a log cabin, but it won't have much power left when it does. So for comparison, let's shoot this without anything in front of it and see what it does to this bottle. After it went through a 6-inch diameter log and without going through it. The 45-70 is fairly low velocity, so it doesn't have a lot of hydrostatic shock, but you can see it did a lot more without a 6-inch diameter log in the way. But what this really tells us is after going through these logs, it still has enough left to do quite a bit of damage to you. So the 45-70 went through the log cabin. Let's try the 44-40 again. And yeah, some people have noticed this has a lot of engraving on it. You want to take a close-up look at it? As I said before, this rifle is made by Uberti, and it's a copy of a Winchester model 1873. It's also a commemorative. Yes, this is really gold plating. And this is one of those fancy rifles that's never really intended to be fired. However, I've fired it a lot, and it shoots pretty well. This is some sort of cattle drive or something or other commemorative. I really don't remember what it is. On the other side, you can see it has a covered wagon and somebody shooting at something. And so it's really a very fancy rifle. An interesting thing too is this is your dust cover. Just like on your M16 series rifles there's a dust cover, this one has it too. And when you go to chamber your first round, it'll move that back. It's kind of an interesting rifle. Okay, as I said before, what made these rifles really popular was the firepower. Let me show you a little bit of what I mean. If you look here, you'll see that that's 9 rounds. I didn't empty the whole magazine. The 44-40 and other rifles like it could put out a lot of rounds by Old West standards. They really were game changers. Now, would they penetrate this log cabin? Let's go around and see. Well, here's the main concentration of our shots, and you can see by the time we finally got up to 7 or 8 in one spot, 1 or 2 of them went through. So basically your log cabin would stop the bullets of these smaller rounds. We've got one more rifle for you today. This is a Lyman Great Plains rifle. It's more or less a copy of the original Hawken rifle. This one's 54 caliber. Now the reality is, in the real pioneer days, the real log cabin days of the 1840s, even through the 1870s, most people had muzzle loading rifles. So if you were in a log cabin and someone was shooting at you, most likely it would be with a rifle like this. Now this is 54 caliber, so it's among the more powerful muzzle loading rifles. You want a little more in-depth view of muzzle-loading rifles, we've got a video on that too. So let's shoot this cabin and see how this does. Well, here's our entrance hole, and no, it did not go through. So we'll take our high-tech measuring stick. About 3.5 inches. So against a muzzle-loading rifle, your log cabin seems to do okay. And remember, this rifle is .54 caliber with 90 grains of 2F black powder. It is among the more powerful muzzle-loading rifles. So it looks like your log cabin against muzzle-loading rifles will do all right. Well, that was pretty interesting. I don't know if the information was any use to you unless you get magically transported back to 1880, or the next time you're watching repeats of Gunsmoke or Bonanza, you'll know when to call BS. But the main thing is, would those building materials work against those guns? Yeah. And I think right about the time that someone upgrades from muzzle loading to cartridge guns is when your building should upgrade from log cabin to rough-hewn lumber. So as always, don't try this at home. I'm what you call a professional. And thanks for watching the Old West Guns versus Old West Building Materials video.